If you've seen many of my videos, then you probably know by now that value is created by human labor and human labor only. Machines can't create value, buying and selling commodities doesn't create value, differences in subjective preference don't create value. Let's review a few different arguments as to why this is the case. The point of any economy is to coordinate human labor in such a way as to provide stuff for people. There are many different ways this labor has been coordinated throughout history, and there will be likely many more ways it will be coordinated in the future. In a capitalist economy, labor is coordinated via commodities. That is, I make a commodity and you make a different commodity. When we exchange them, we are exchanging our labor. That's how our collective labors are organized. The only reason all of these diverse commodities can exchange with each other is because they're all products of human labor in the abstract. But commodities don't walk around with their value written all over them. If they did, capitalism would be a lot easier to understand and you wouldn't need to be watching this video. You can't buy a toothbrush and read on the toothbrush how many hours it took to make, how many people worked to make it, what their working conditions were, how it was shipped to the store, who put it on the shelf. Value has to be expressed through money. Money prices are an expression of value. But here's where things start to get confusing. How is value measured in money prices? Is price always equal to value? What happens when price doesn't equal value? Since anyone can set any price they want when they sell a commodity, it may at first seem hard to see how price could realistically reflect value. But we know from our own lives there seem to be some sorts of forces at work in the universe, some hidden hand of the market that keeps prices from being totally arbitrary. A toothbrush or a new car costs more or less the same anywhere you buy it. Not only that, but the car always costs more than the toothbrush. So what are these forces that make prices converge? And is it just a coincidence that things that take more work to make usually cost more than things that take little time to make? The more perfect competition is in a capitalist society, the harder it is to arbitrarily set prices above values. Perfect competition makes it impossible to just conceive of prices as arbitrary or of profit as a mere markup above costs. We also can assume that supply and demand balance each other out. Obviously, if supply ever shrinks or demand rises, this will create a rise in prices above values. But this rise in price means a rise in profits for those capitalists producing these scarce goods, which in turn encourages other capitalists to invest in producing this good, which in turn increases the supply until prices are whittled back down to an equilibrium point. The argument of the labor theory of value is that behind all these fluctuations there lie equilibrium prices, and that these equilibrium prices correspond to the value of commodities. Now, what happens when monopoly, trickery, or demand allows someone to get away with arbitrarily charging more for a commodity than its value? Well, in that case, the total amount of value in society still corresponds to the total amount of prices. So if someone is getting away with arbitrarily high prices, it means that someone else is not getting the full value of their commodity. In this way, though profit can't be created through exchange, it can be shuffled around between people. But such an inequality does not create more value. The real source of profit in a capitalist society is always the difference between the value of commodities and the wages paid to workers. And this, of course, is the theory of exploitation. So if we abstract from disturbances in competition or minor fluctuations in supply and demand, we see that commodities, in general, have prices that are relatively proportional to their values, or at least they would if there wasn't for one other complicating factor. It is this other factor that required Marx to theorize about the transformation of values into prices of production, and which has created all the fuss for all these years. The same way in which supply and demand fluctuate around equilibrium price also creates an average rate of profit amongst capitalists. That is, if one capitalist is making more profit than the rest, other capitalists will start doing whatever he or she is doing and thus eat into his or her profits. And through this sort of competition, an average rate of profit is established amongst capitalists. But this average rate of profit seems, at first, to conflict with something else that I've talked about in other videos, something called the organic composition of capital. Let's illustrate this with an example. Let's say we have two industries. One makes coffee and the other cars. Between the two industries, the organic composition differs. That is, the ratio of machines to workers differs. Some industries just naturally have a higher ratio of machines to workers than others. In this example, the automobile industry has a higher ratio of machines to workers than the coffee industry. Now, if value can only be created by human labor, it would seem that the coffee industry creates a lot more value than the car industry. And actually, this is the case. The more work that's done in an industry, the more value it creates. Yet, under conditions of competition, under the law of the average rate of profit, both industries receive the same profits, even if one creates much less value. An average rate of profit means that each capitalist receives the same rate of return on their total investments, regardless of what proportion of this investment goes to workers or machines. But how is this possible? Here is the solution to this puzzle. The total amount of value in society is equal to the total amount of prices. The total amount of profit is equal to the total amount of surplus value. And the total rate of profit measured in value in society as a whole is equal to the total rate of profit measured in money. These are the three aggregate equalities that form the holy trinity of the theory of the prices of production. Individual capitalists can have money prices or profits that diverge from their values, but in the aggregate, these equalities must prevail. But how? All capitalists contribute to the total amount of surplus value according to how much labor they employ. So if coffee makers have more workers, they contribute more surplus value. But capitalists withdraw their money profits from this total surplus value according to the average rate of profit, that is, in proportion to the total cost of production. Regardless of how many workers they employ, they all receive the same rate of return on their investment. Thus, the price of a commodity is not actually the cost of inputs plus surplus value. It's the cost of inputs plus the average rate of return on those investments. We call this price the price of production. The total prices of production equal the total amount of value in society, but individual commodities do not actually trade at their values. They trade at their prices of production. The price of production is still a function of value, but it is not necessarily directly equal to it. This is why it is possible to have a falling rate of profit. Individual capitalists have no way of knowing that they are destabilizing the collective rate of profit because they don't receive less profit when they replace workers with machines. It is only when automation has spread throughout the entire economy to a substantial extent that it can drag down the profit rate. This relationship between individual action and wider social forces is true to the spirit of much of Marxist theory. Individuals are always free to act as they choose. That's the easy part of social theory. The hard part of a good social theory is to explain why those free actions coalesce around certain norms. For Marx, it is value which is the central mediating force between individuals, and so it is the laws of motion of this value that ultimately govern the success or failure of individual actions.